everyone, and welcome back to Pod Save the Youth. I'm your host, David Seaton.
I'm Markus Sindaceros.
And today we're going to be discussing the results from Tuesday night and the Super Tuesday results from a bunch of states across the country, most notably California and Texas in the U.S. Senate elections. And we're very happy today to be welcoming a special guest onto the podcast. I'll let you introduce yourself right now.
Hi guys, my name is Anika Yu. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, Northern California, and from a small town called Dublin. I met David and Markus last year, 2023, in the summer in Washington, D.C. And in Northern California, I do a lot of work in local education policy as a student board member of my district, and also in education policy across the country, just furthering student youth voices on school boards across the country.
Amazing. Well, that is the perfect segue into our conversation today. Last night on Tuesday, Donald Trump won the vast majority of primary contests, winning 15 out of the 16 primaries. And Nikki Haley won one contest in Vermont. Notably, in the states where there was an open primary, where Democrats and independents were allowed to vote for Republicans, Nikki Haley did significantly better in those states than she did in the states with closed primaries, where only Republicans were allowed to vote. In Vermont, we saw that Nikki Haley won by 4 points. And one of the areas where she really benefited from independent and Democratic turnout was in the suburbs of Boston, of Salt Lake City, and of Burlington, Vermont, where she dominated among college-educated voters who were independent, Republican, and the Democratic crossover voters. So I think it's definitely interesting to consider the impact that open primaries make on this contest. But Markus, what is your take on what happened last night?
Yeah, so in advance to our viewers, I apologize for background noise. I am at the airport. But I think the results were, I wouldn't say they weren't surprising, but they weren't shocking. I think we all expected Donald Trump to come in and win all these states. I think the one state that actually surprised me the most was Vermont. I think Vermont was a big shock to a lot of people. I know, David, you said that there was a possibility Nikki Haley could win your home state. Unfortunately, those results did not happen.
You have no right to bring up my previous take. That is private information. Oh my gosh, Markus.
No, I'm funny. But I think it was. I know we're talking about the primary, but I think it's like 20 to 30% of each state had voters who weren't supporting him. So I think it's also another thing to note is like he still has a lot of ground to gain, even within his own party.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also notably what you said kind of leads into my next point here with the fact that in Vermont, when there was a poll a few weeks ago from, I think, ABC, Donald Trump was leading by around 20 points. And nobody expected, after seeing that poll, Nikki Haley to get the support and the win that she eventually did. But it really does show the power of these Democratic and independent voters in the Republican primary that were not being polled by the Republican pollsters. Okay. Well, we can talk about the Democratic primary, where Joe Biden dominated the contests in every single state. But in most states, there was kind of a question as to how big the uncommitted vote would be, but it didn't really pan out. But the only place where I really saw a challenge to Joe Biden and some warning signs for the general election and his performance with Democrats was in South Texas, where he underperformed what he was supposed to get in the Rio Grande Valley region with Hispanic voters, with largely Hispanic voters. We saw that Armando Perez Cerrado, I think that's how you pronounce his name, he almost won a bunch of the Rio Grande counties, which was pretty unexpected. He's a very conservative Democrat who campaigned on building the border wall and ran for governor of California. Anika, I don't know if you know of him.
No, I don't really know. I've never heard of Armando, but I know that whoever he probably appealed to the Hispanic population in Rio Grande. And I think in California, really reaching the minority voters and speaking to them and making them heard in your politics, if you are a candidate, um that's really impactful because in our state we do have a lot of minority populations who just don't have faith in the democratic process, and they don't come out and vote because they don't feel seen or heard by the candidates. So I'm guessing that's probably what happened there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. That's my theory as well. I think that, as you said, there are a lot of people, especially people of color, who have been really disenfranchised for years from this democratic process and are feeling very disconnected right now from the Biden administration and from the Biden campaign for a number of reasons. It's not just because they're, maybe more liberal than Joe Biden or more conservative on some issues. It's, I think, just a lack of messaging and a disconnect between what the Biden administration is actually doing and then what people are hearing about with regards to minority issues and um, issues that could affect people in areas like the Rio Grande Valley.
yeah. David, also just to note is like Minnesota was also one state that he actually, I believe Biden only won like 68% or 69%. Last time I saw it, I think it was last night, early this morning. That was also a shocking. I think that's the most, I think, in any Democratic state that he's got the least amount of votes in, I think, in Democratic primary. I know that's also Representative Ilhan Omar's state. So I think it's really interesting to see how that actually played out too. But I think also leading into this is we did see Vice President Kamala Harris call for a ceasefire, but a ceasefire for 6 weeks, also to note. Which I think a lot of people got confused. I personally got confused. I think hearing her voice, she was very shaky and very nervous. I think in that moment when she was doing that, I think she knows that the Biden administration will get blowback from everyone. Whether they don't call it, they lose support within their base. If they call it a ceasefire, they lose support with conservatives, moderates on that going. So I think it is definitely going to be another interesting way to see the Biden-Harris campaign slowly going towards this fully ceasefire. But they're dropping more support. But I think there should be a fully ceasefire, as Gen Z has been calling for. And
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'll echo that. I'll also say one of the reasons why I believe that the Biden administration has changed, maybe not their policy, but just their messaging on the issue of the war in Gaza was because of the Michigan results, where the uncommitted vote got about 13% of the vote, and Biden got like 81%. So it is interesting your point about Minnesota, because that is significantly less than in
yeah,
Michigan. Um, but yeah, definitely the shift in Arab voters in supporting Joe Biden was definitely a warning sign to the administration. The uncommitted vote, which was largely a protest to Joe Biden on his and the Biden administration on their support for Israel in this war, received two delegates that will actually go to the Democratic convention, where activists will be able to push the party further to the left on this issue. So that's something to watch there. It'll be interesting to see who gets selected for those delegate positions. I believe that one of them will go to the leader of this uncommitted movement, which is actually Rashida Tlaib, Congresswoman Tlaib's sister, who was a dominant figure in this uncommitted movement. But yeah, just talking about Michigan one more time, the areas where Biden underperformed were not only in Arab communities in the Dearborn and the Wayne County region around Detroit, but also in the predominantly student county where the University of Michigan is located. So what kind of warning signs do we see for Biden's campaign with young people after these Michigan results?
yeah, as the airport thing goes over me right now, it's speaking words about security. There's a lot of warning signs. The Biden administration has so much work to do with young voters. I think as we mentioned this in all of our past episodes, like Gen Z is a very radical humanitarian generation, and They don't care if you're a Democrat, Independent, Republican. They want you to not engage in warfare, and kill and support innocent people um, on any effort or anywhere in the world, no matter who they are. So I think they have a really big, not even just a messaging thing. It's just more of just like a ability to relate to young voters and actually uplift younger voices within the party into party leadership positions and uplifting younger candidates in general. So there's a lot. And it concerns me a lot as a young voter. But they have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And for me, with 8 months to go until November, I just don't see the same youth movement, youth push for Biden happening again like it did in 2020 when there was so much TikTok, so much social media traction that youth were generating for Biden. This year, I do not see that happening at all. I don't think youth can accept Biden as like the lesser evil alternative to Trump anymore. And a lot of people will say, well, under Trump, nothing's going to be better anyway. But in this moment, I don't think that people are willing to mobilize for Biden just because of that reason from 4 years ago at all.
Yeah, and even if it's not a specific policy that young people can point out that they think that Trump would do better on, I think there is a general feeling that before COVID, which was a more of a global issue, the economy was stronger, largely thanks to Obama's policies under the Trump administration than than it is right now after in the COVID recovery. Although we have seen a really strong recovery, and I think the Biden administration can message about the progress that we've made since COVID, but people still definitely have those kind of rosy economic memories of the Trump administration, even young people. And also during COVID, people remember receiving checks from Donald Trump with his name on them, saying, this is from the president cares about you, which also happened under Biden. But I think people really remember that more acutely under Trump for some reason.
Yeah, I think it's also it's very sad to see because I think many people could say that like if the war in Gaza didn't happen, I think more young voters would be more willing to be more mobilized, and that if Biden would have just went out straightforward in the beginning and said, let's go, let's like this is a crisis, this is an issue that I don't think is worth pushing the can down the road until the election gets closer. We're gonna be strong here, and we're gonna call for a ceasefire, and we're gonna do everything in our power to have humanitarian aid and to have a humanitarian end to the crisis in Gaza. But instead, the Biden campaign just chose to wait until the party forced them to do it. And it's only going to end up hurting them, the general election. And it's sad to see Minnesota. Like Minnesota was a very, very close state. And Arizona is the same way too. Biden only won there like less than 20,000 votes in those both states. So it's going to be, oh gosh, yeah, very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And for Kamala Harris to call for a ceasefire like a day before Super Tuesday, to a lot of young voters, that was just a virtue signaling kind of like last ditch attempt to save votes. And I don't know what the Biden Harris campaign thinks young people are with their, like flashy social media or some of their jokes they post on Instagram. But I think that young voters definitely see past that, and we were a little offended by that action.
Yeah, definitely. On the messaging side, I'll also say, I think what we've seen with Kamala Harris's announcement is kind of the extension of a pattern with the Biden administration for their policies on fighting back against, the war or, Republican policies. Specifically, I see a parallel to how they talk about abortion. They very rarely actually mention the word abortion in their messaging. They often say, we're trying to protect women's freedom, women's reproductive rights, but they hardly ever say the word abortion. And it's hard to get a message out there if you're the Biden administration, if you're a Biden campaign staff or whatever, if you can't actually say the word that you're trying to encourage people to vote on. And it's the same thing with a ceasefire. I think that the policy of the Biden administration for the past I don't know, maybe like 4 weeks has been to try to get a 6 week ceasefire. But for a long time, they've been saying a 6 week pause in fighting instead of a ceasefire. And for Kamala Harris to come out a few days ago with this explicit call for a ceasefire, it is a change in messaging, but I think it is just, as you said, Anika, just too little, too late. Um, at least for the primaries. I think there is room for them to change policy going into the general and to, more explicitly state what they're actually fighting for and against. But with young people having the short memory spans that we have and the short attention spans that we have, you have to be able to articulate your message quickly, directly and effectively. And that's going to mean saying the word that you're trying to talk about.
Well said, David.
Let's talk about Texas just a little bit more, and then we'll talk about California and the Senate race. One thing that I found interesting was the same voters in the same counties that were a bit tentative to vote for Biden and largely kind of moved away from him to support a more conservative candidate on the presidential level were the same counties that backed Roland Gutierrez on the Senate level, a very progressive challenger to Colin Allred, the eventual Democratic nominee, which I thought was interesting there. These also are the same counties in the Rio Grande Valley that largely went for Bernie Sanders in 2016, uh, showing that there simply is no ideologically pure voting pattern that we can see in these areas. But let's talk about California because I think it's the biggest part of the night for Democrats. There was a slightly competitive race for the U.S. Senate that was happening that was going on for the past, I don't know, 6 months between Adam Schiff, a congressman, and two congresswomen from the state of California, Katie Porter from Southern California, and Orange County, a conservative to moderate area, and Barbara Lee, who is from Oakland, a very progressive area in Northern California. And Adam Schiff dominated in every single county, regardless of where it was in the state. Nika, what is your take on how these results played out, and was it consistent with what you were hearing about how competitive this race was supposed to be on the Democratic side?
Yeah, I mean, from the moment, unfortunately, Dianne Feinstein passed away, we knew that it was going to be a competitive race. The chance to get the Senate seat that hasn't been open for 3 decades. And for me, I mean, Adam Schiff was polling consistently way above any of his opponents. So although the results were personally disappointing to me, it wasn't that surprising. I personally thought that maybe Porter and Lee would have gotten more of the vote, um, at least like a little bit more, like above 10% each. Barbara Lee at least above 10%, but that just goes to show I live in a very, very liberal or even leftist bubble in Northern California. And who I personally talk to and um who other people who are aligned with my beliefs were not part of the majority because I personally voted for Barbara Lee and a lot of people I know voted for Katie Porter. But I was also surprised that Steve Garvey made it to second place. I think this is part of the trend of Californians being more and more um, this being more and more dissatisfied with California's policies on, maybe crime and economic policy. Steve Garvey is kind of that Trumpy figure that a lot of older Californians need. I mean, the dude voted for Trump. The dude voted for Trump 2 times, but he's that he's that Republican figure that some older Californians need to kind of put all their complaints about California on and support in the Senate race.
Yeah, Something also notable to point out about Steve Garvey's performance was that he was helped out by a certain Democratic candidate named Adam Schiff. He was running ads for Steve Garvey in the last 2 weeks of the campaign cycle. And I mean, his philosophy was that if he helped Steve Garvey win the primary, then he would have an easy chance winning the general as a Democrat versus a Republican in the state of California. But, as you were saying, there are people who are now concerned about California possibly moving over into a more competitive uh, status in this race where Democrats really can't afford to have another competitive race where they're spending resources, spending money, and obviously any sort of movement in California is concerning because California is such a big state, such an expensive state for a campaign to take place in. Um, I mean, I don't think this is a good strategy for Democrats. And it also hurts Democrats down ballot if you're having a Republican that is maybe a untraditional candidate, but still drives up Republican turnout, that helps Republicans in every single competitive US House seat. And there are, I believe, 5 competitive House seats that could flip over to Democrats, and that would certainly have a higher chance of going that way if the Senate race was simply a Democrat versus a Democrat.
What you said, so yeah, I personally, for the first time in a long time, having two older white men be the top two going to the November election for California senator, it is a little odd. This is my first election year as an 18-year-old, but it is a little odd for me too, just because California is so diverse. We hear it all the time. And California is not representative of the rest of the country. And this is kind of like my first realization, at least in the world of politics, to that. And it's just interesting that, voters showed out for Adam Schiff and Steve Garvey.
Yeah, I mean he is an older white man. Both of the candidates are older white men, and at this time we hear so much in the news about how voters are so dissatisfied with Biden and Trump on the top of the ticket. But yeah, there is a question about representation. That's absolutely right. I listened to an episode of another podcast with a Republican in California named Mike Madrid, and he was talking about how if Democrats are supposed to be the party of diversity in California, they need to start showing that in who they elect to office. There could be, if we're going to be a representative party, we have to start electing a diverse slate of candidates in the states where it's easy to do that, like in California. And we had the the benefit of representing people adequately in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah. I'm from California. I was born there. I mean, I have all my family's there. I think California has always been a very interesting, it used to be a very conservative state, like 30, 40 years ago. And then now it's somehow is this amazing blue, shining blue diamond in the middle of the West Coast. But I think seeing Adam Schiff win, basically he's the senator now. So from California, I think it was. And many people could say that his work on the January 6th committee probably mobilized him to be propped up for this seat. But I think it was also disappointing. I think, from my understanding, is that like Barbara Lee and Katie Porter will now no longer be members of Congress because they didn't run for the House. They vacated their House seats and Katie Porter's seat was very, very competitive. And the fact that she was like a radical leftist in the middle of Orange County was still able to win 2 or 3 terms to Congress, I think just speaks about her character and her willingness. People said, she's too far to the left. This woman was still able to win a purple district 3 or 4 terms over. So I personally am disappointed in the results from California. I think California could do a little better in electing more diverse, young people of color, just in general, to their Senate and show them that they do want to embrace people of color in leadership positions, and that they don't think that's what we're seeing. So yeah.
Yeah, I think you raise an interesting point there. Adam Schiff was the candidate with, I would say, the highest name recognition now for at least the voters who are predominantly voting now. I know Barbara Lee has been in Congress for a bit longer. She did develop a name for herself as the one dissenting vote on the war in Iraq, I believe. Um, and that definitely earned her some street cred with the progressive lane of the party for a very long time. But Adam Schiff did, he played a dominant role in the impeachments of Trump, and ever since then he's been bombarding Democrats across the country, like myself, with text messages and emails and just campaign information for this kind of little known would be little known congressman, but he has his ground game down. I mean, he has so much name recognition. He goes on every talk show. He goes on every news platform and spreads his message. So although he wouldn't be my choice for the Senate in California, I think that he did something right in this race with getting his name out there and getting that name recognition before the election. Um, and that is kind of similar to something I see in my state with Governor Haley. You know, she's not, I would say, the most progressive governor. Um, but she gained the support of a lot of progressives because she made a name for herself as Attorney General, standing up and prosecuting, or not prosecuting Trump, but taking his administration's policies to court. Uh, yeah, so celebrities, whether it's a baseball player or a person who did a who played a key role in the Trump impeachments, um, they matter. On that note, I think we're gonna try to wrap things up here. Takeaways from the night: Nikki Haley has now dropped out of the race, and it is officially a race between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, like many of us have known for a while and predicted for a while, but we're here. There's no denying it. And on the Senate level, we've got two states in California and Texas with more, I would say, of the moderate options that were selected by the voters to represent the Democratic Party if they do win in the Senate races this year.
Yeah, I just want to take this time to just let people know this, but Nikki Haley was the first woman in the Republican Party to ever win a primary election, presidential year. So I'll give her that one little history thing that she made
That's
as
crazy.
a woman in the Republican Party. She's the first woman to ever win a state in the primary election for the Republican Party. So I'll give her that. I mean, I give her 1% credit for taking him on, even though she worked for him, his administration. But that's a common pattern with him. So we'll see more and more in that come and play out. But we're here now. So we have two of the oldest nominees ever in history. So I feel like we're on repeat in 2020. And I think a lot of us are burned out. I think a lot of people are just burned out because they feel like it's a repeat of 2020, and the options are just 4 years older. And they, one of them got a lot of amazing policies done, and one of them turned the country upside down. So, yep.
Yes. Yeah, and I'll ask you one more thing, Markus. Any just off the cuff takes about your wonderful senator deciding that she is no longer seeking re-election in the state of Arizona, Kirsten Sinema? What do you think?
In the words of her, I think Arizonans came to a bipartisan agreement that she was not ready and she wasn't good for Arizona. She will go down as one of the most sellout, interesting, terrible senators. I'll give her one credit. She was the creator of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which was titled the Investment and Jobs Act. I'll give her that. I'm a personal fan. We're actually getting Amtrak services from Tucson to Phoenix because of that bill. So I'll give her that one credit. And some of my school districts are actually getting electric buses because of that bill. So one great, I guess, thing that she did for Arizonans was that. But she's done. She's done so. So she's bye-bye. She's going on to a corporate board or executive board. She'll run some gas oil company or something. Who knows what she'll do. But she'll definitely be taken care of. And she will not have to fly American first class anymore. Private jet on standby. So yeah. Good riddance.
Well said. Any last words here from Anika?
I would just say, this year the results really showed that politics still is kind of more of a game than an actual meritocracy. We have powerful majority dominant, majority white, majority men candidates being funded by PACs and being funded by, some shady money or doing like shady tactics to get elected. And I'm not really sure where the future of the country is and how November will play out, but the primaries definitely are an indicator that we still it's not politics still aren't progressive across the slate in United States.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for watching today. And thank you to our amazing panelists here. You all did amazing. And on that note, thank you all for watching Pod Save the Youth. I'm David Seaton.
I'm Markus Sinaceros.
And I'm Anika Yu.
Join us next time on Pod Save the Youth.